So what happens when just one student's dream gets crushed by a system that feels totally unfair? Well, sometimes that one student decides to fight back and takes that fight all the way to the Supreme Court. And in doing so, they end up changing the law for literally everyone. It's an incredible story, so let's dive right in.
Okay, so this whole thing kicks off with the admissions process for a pretty prestigious engineering college. Now you've got a tough written exam worth 100 marks. Makes sense. But then you have the oral interview. A quick chat, maybe a few minutes long, and it's worth a whopping 50 marks. I mean, think about that. Half the value of the entire written test is riding on this short, kind of subjective conversation.
And this story quickly became about way more than just one unfair test. It actually forced the Supreme Court to grapple with a really fundamental question. Who is actually responsible for protecting our rights? Who can we hold accountable? And the answer they came up with, well, it would completely change the definition of what the state even means.
All right, so let's meet the person at the heart of this whole thing, Ajay Hasia. He's this bright, ambitious student, and his dream is to become an engineer. He's got his sights set on the Regional Engineering College in Srinagar. So he hits the books, he aces the written exam. He's feeling pretty good about his chances. And then he has to do the interview.
And this is where the story takes a really strange turn. You see, Ajay Hasia and a bunch of other students who did great on the written test suddenly get these bizarrely low scores in the interview. And just like that, they're rejected. But at the same time, you've got students with lower written scores who somehow get these exceptionally high marks in the interview and they get in. Yeah, something just wasn't adding up at all.
So let's just pause on this for a second. That interview we're talking about, it's just 2 or 3 minutes long with really general questions. And that little chat accounted for a full 1/3 of a candidate's total score, a full 33.3%. So Ajay Hasia argued, hey, this isn't a real test of my abilities. This is just a system that's wide open to bias and, favoritism.
Okay, so you'd think the court would just look at the test and decide if it was fair, right? Well, not so fast. Before they could even get to that question, Ajay hit this huge legal wall. See, he was arguing that his fundamental right to equality was being violated. But there's a catch when it comes to fundamental rights.
Here's the thing. In India, your fundamental rights are like a shield, but you can only use that shield against the state. We're talking about government bodies here. You can't just sue, say, a private coffee shop for violating your constitutional right to equality. And that was the college's whole argument. They said, hey, we're not the state, so this case doesn't even apply to us.
And that simple defense forced the Supreme Court to confront a massive question, really the question that this entire case hinged on. So what exactly is the state?
So here's the puzzle the court had to solve. On one hand, you've got your obvious government departments, totally the state. But this engineering college, it was stuck in this weird legal gray area. See, on paper, it was just a society registered under some local act. So was it private, or was it basically the government in disguise? The entire case depended on that answer.
All right, let's get to the verdict. The court, which was led by the legendary Justice P.N. Bhagwati, had to figure this all out. And what they came back with was a truly landmark judgment that just tackled both of Ajay's problems one by one.
The court's ruling was just crystal clear. Bam! Finding number 1. Yes, this college is a state. And bam! Finding number 2. Because it's a state, that crazy admission process is arbitrary and, yep, it violates the right to equality. No gray area left.
So, the big question is, how did the court get there? How did they decide this society was actually a state? Well, they didn't just pull the answer out of thin air. They created this brilliant, super practical legal tool that we now call the instrumentality test.
And the whole idea behind this test came from this really powerful line in the judgment. The court basically said, look, you can't just get bogged down by the label, by the form. It's like, don't judge a book by its cover. Just because you call something a society on paper doesn't mean we can ignore what it really is and what it really does. It's the substance, not the label, that truly matters.
And this is the genius of the test they laid out. The court just started asking these very practical questions about the college. Does the government provide almost all the money? Yep. Does the government have deep, pervasive control over how it's run? Oh yeah. Is it doing a job that's really important for the public? Like education? Absolutely. And this was a game changer. It gave courts this checklist to look right past the name and see what an organization really is. And the college? It checked every single box. It was an instrument of the state hiding in plain sight.
So why do we still talk about this case today?
Well, the impact was huge. This was so much more than just a win for Ajay Hasia. The ripple effects from this one decision have been protecting citizens for decades.
Basically, the Ajay Hasia case just blew the old definition of state wide open. It set this incredibly powerful precedent that stops the government from just, setting up a corporation or a society to wiggle out of its constitutional duties. It means that any organization that is deeply entangled with the government, we're talking public universities, big state-owned companies, even sports boards, they all have to play fair. And that test the court created, it's still the gold standard used in courtrooms today.
But what about Ajay Hasia and the other students who started this whole fight? Well, the court made sure they got their justice. It ordered the college to admit them in the very next academic year. They finally got the chance that they had earned from the very beginning.
And that brings this whole incredible story to a close. But it leaves us with a really interesting question, doesn't it? Thanks to one student's fight, we now have this toolkit to look past the fancy labels and see what's really going on underneath. So it makes you wonder, as you look at the world around you, how many other states are just hiding in plain sight?